GradingPal is an AI-powered teaching assistant specifically designed to help teachers with the workflow around grading. It gives rubric-aligned scoring and high-quality feedback for students. Now, some of you may be surprised to find out that GradingPal can grade artwork. Some of you may be intrigued. Some of you may be skeptical that it can do it. Some of you may think it's not right. I don't know. For my mind, I'm interested in it. You know, the subjectivity of liking art and evaluating art has always seemed interesting to me. You know, I'm not a visual artist. I'm a teacher, but I like going to museums, looking at art in galleries, and wondering what goes into evaluating it. Sometimes I find, you know, different people's opinions and evaluations of artwork, you know, well done, like it makes sense to me. Sometimes I think, who knows, right? Why did they decide that? Um, Grading art projects can be, you know, some of the most meaningful work I think that art teachers do. It could also be mentally demanding and a little, you know, maybe nerve wracking. You worry about or maybe hurting a child's feelings. I don't know. You're evaluating intention, their decisions, reflection, not just whether something looks good, right? Let me show you how I use GradingPal to support that process without flattening student creativity. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not a visual artist. I'm a teacher. Maybe when you look at what I'm about to show you, some visual art, you'll know that I'm not a visual artist. But because I'm a teacher, I've always been interested in trying new things, right? Being a lifelong learner. So I did make some art at some point. You can see it a little bit here. It's got a little bit of a glare on it from my lights here. But I took a picture of it and made a PDF, and I'm going to upload that into an assignment, just like maybe a high school art student would. And I'll show you that in a moment. So let me show you how to set up the assignment for artwork. We scroll down in the setup wizard. We see art and design and click next. I have an assignment that art teacher friend shared with me. That was the inspiration for what I have there that I started showing you. This is creating an original visual artwork. You know, I do want the children to have choice, the students to have choice, and I want the students to know that we're going to grade them based on their intention, right? Not their creativity. We're not grading your creativity or your talent. We're grading you based on your choices, your intention in those choices, and your focus with it. And the child also has some opportunity to reflect that in an artist statement. Click Create Rubric. Here I'm going to say focus on intent and choices and written explanation in the artist's statement. We are not grading artistic talent or creativity. I can review the rubric here. We see it focused well on my directions because the first criterion is about intent. The second criterion is strategic use of artistic elements, right? You can do that even if you're not a very talented artist, right? If you've been paying attention in the class, you can do strategic use of artistic elements. So the AI that created the rubric listens to my directions really well. And then the artistic statement has its content and requirements, and you know that you justify your choices maybe in the artist statement. And then I have the opportunity to choose my feedback settings, and I'm ready to upload the submission. I have it as a PDF. Again, I was talking here as if I was setting up an assignment as an art teacher, but I'm not an art teacher. But I did make some art, and I uploaded that PDF, and I can upload that PDF here from my device. So I'm grading thinking and intention, not artistic talent. And here is the student work uploaded as a PDF. Again, I made this. Please don't judge. I let the AI do that. And actually, you could see it was quite nice to me, you know? So here's a picture of my work, a collage I made with some paint, mixed media. I never liked those drips there. That comes from a medium I applied to try to make the paint run, but actually the yellow streaks ran instead. And here's my artist statement. This is based on the colored purple. I wrote, I wanted to portray the tension between grace and earthiness, between the lightness of faith and the grounded, complex messiness of our earthly experience. This image contains pages from The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Once I was reading an old worn-out paperback copy of the book that was quite literally falling apart. I was struck by the idea of making visual art from the pages. And I go on to explain a little bit here how I took some of the pages that say, Dear God, you know, at the beginning of each chapter title, because this book, as many of you know, if you've read it, was, you know, written as a series of letters to God, right? And I put the white space around Dear God. I called it negative space. That's an artistic concept, right? I was trying to capture what a high school student, maybe a really weird high school student might do in their artist statement, right? And we can see some scoring and student feedback here off to the side. Before we jump into that feedback, let's look at the rubric, okay? So my rubric here focuses on intent, not necessarily the talent, you know? And it focuses, again, on the intentional use of visual elements. So this is intent about the artist's meaning, right? And this is intentional use of visual art principles, right? Like color and line. We can see a little bit about craft and execution, which you might call talent. So let's dive into that. For example, developing would be the work is complete, but some areas may feel rushed or neglected. For example, some pencil marks might be visible where they shouldn't be, or the background may feel less than finished than the main subject. Let's see here. The work is fully completed and shows high level of care and execution. Examples include clean edges in a collage, smooth blending in a painting, or possible purposeful layering in digital work. So I'm already thinking ahead to the scoring on mine. Maybe the AI graded me a little too generously here, because remember I pointed out those yellow streaks running down that I didn't intend, right? So maybe it gave me proficient here when I might have put myself somewhere closer to developing, and that I don't think would hurt a kid's feelings too much, because developing still gets them 20 points, out of a possible 25. So they might understand they have some room to grow. I'll show you in a moment how you can edit the scores. GradingPal analyzed the artwork and the artist statement together, and it drafted feedback tied directly to the rubric. So let's take a look at what it said. Overall, it says your collage is a stunning example of how literature can be transformed into visual art. Okay, makes me feel good. Not sure I deserve it, but you have successfully balanced a very high-level concept regarding the tension between grace and earthiness with clear intentional design choices like vertical and horizontal orientation. Your technical use of texture and your willingness to adapt your plan, like adding the purple paint, show the marks of a developing artist who is both thoughtful and brave. Moving forward, I encourage you to keep exploring this intertextual approach. Okay, well done. So it's very encouraging, right? Let's look at the intent and communication. You achieve the proficient level for this criterion. That's the highest level in this case, because your work communicates a deeply specific and sophisticated idea, the tension between grace and earthiness. I'm doing well here based on the ideas part, the meaning part. Okay. Some of you may think it's a little overdone, or I don't know, but the AI says objectively pretty good. Let's look at the intentional use of visual elements. It says your work is proficient in its use of visual language to support your message. Your explanation of orientation is particularly impressive, using vertical blocks for the Dear God salutations to represent ascension, while placing the blocks of text horizontally to express groundedness shows a high level of compositional awareness. Cool. I like it. You also effectively used negative space to represent the spaciousness we may feel when we address God. Right? One area for continued growth, I like this. Okay, so it's being very complimentary, but it's still being rigorous here because it's telling me how I could grow, would be the integration of the paint. Okay, while the purple heaven represents the heavens, you could experiment with selective emphasis. Interesting. What does that mean? For instance, instead of a general wash or impasto layer, you could use the paint to partially obscure or highlight specific phrases in the text that represent those fears and doubts you mentioned. Interesting. So I kind of just threw purple as a layer on. I like the way I blended the colors, but what it's saying is it's maybe too it's obscuring too much of the text. And I could have had like a layer so we can see through to the text. And in that way, maybe the paint and the text would talk, be in dialogue with one another. Wow, this is impressive that AI can do this. Feels like a quality art review, right? Craft and execution. Here's where I think it graded me a little too generously. We can go back and look at the grading in a moment, but let's look at the student feedback. This submission reaches the proficient level due to your purposeful use of materials and texture. Your application of impasto, or impasto, I'm not sure how to say that, to add depth and messiness is a successful technical choice that aligns with your theme of earthly complexity. The collage shows a high level of care in how the blocks were cut and layered to create a cohesive panel. Okay, I think it's interesting here that it didn't say anything about the yellow streaks running down. Again, we want to be encouraging to students, like the student tried something and it didn't quite work. The history of science and art both are populated with some, happy accidents, but I wouldn't call this yellow streaking down here a happy accident. I would call it something to try to avoid in the future. And since the student's getting an overall great score, I think it would be fine to say something like that here, right? I can click into edit manually. You have done great work. However, if you choose to continue with this approach, you will want to learn how, or you want to, maybe that sounds a little judgy. You will want to research, right? You want to research how to use the yellow medium to get the paint to drip a bit more and try to avoid having the yellow streaks run down. And then I might say, I hope this doesn't sound, this is what I would do as an art teacher. I hope this doesn't sound too judgmental. Overall, this is wonderful what would be, encouraging? I would, especially with artwork, which can be emotional, right? I would soften any feedback. But I think you'll see too that there wasn't anything in here that was cold or robotic from the AI. In fact, quite the opposite, right? It's talking here about the selective emphasis. I thought that was really, really interesting. So that's how we can adjust the feedback. And like I said, I might go over here to scoring, rubric scoring, craft and execution. And let's look at the rubric levels again, right? Okay. It says I was proficient. This work is fully completed and shows a high level of care and execution. Well, it does do that. Examples include clean edges in a claw. I wouldn't call that yellow and clean. So I might say here, I might knock the student down to developing. Overall, they're still doing very well. So I would click edit, and then I can click down a level, and now it's developing rather than proficient. You can see 20 out of 25. Again, still overall good score. And then I'm going to scroll back down here. I can adjust the reasoning for the score if I want. I already think I did that well enough in the feedback, but you might say something about the yellowing part here. It's good enough for now, and I'm going to click save. All right, and since the artist statement was down here in the same PDF, you can see, right, the picture of my painting or my collage and the artist PDF. I just wanted to show that GradingPal was able to grade both, right, the visual image and the writing. It says the student's artist statement is exceptionally thorough, far exceeding the 46 sentence requirement. Longer doesn't always mean better, right, but I got credit for it here. It clearly articulates a complex intent, the tension between faith and earthly experience, and shows or explains several specific artistic choices, okay? So it's explaining how I used art-specific vocabulary and explaining my high score there. So I say in every video that we do here at GradingPal, the purpose is not to replace teachers. Teacher judgment will always be supremely important, right? But it can make grading more sustainable, right? You're not lowering standards. Your judgment is still key, but you're protecting your energy so you can stay thoughtful and consistent. As you saw, the AI feedback wasn't robotic. I don't think it's going to hurt children's feelings, and you're going to review it all anyway. You're going to help the child make sense of it. If you're an art teacher, this gives you more time to sit side by side and teach them those techniques. Teach them more about the technique to get the paint to bunch up and give texture. Teach them more about the technique to get the paint to run down without those yellow streaks. So, if you're spending less time grading, you have more time to develop that relationship with the student and teach them the skills. If you teach art, design, or any other creative subject, just know GradingPal is for you too. It's not just for essays and worksheets. It helps you grade with intention, reflection, and it keeps growth in mind. It's not just turning art into a checklist. I hope you'll give it a try at gradingpal.com.